want to welcome the young ladies that are in our class today and tell you what we're doing here. You know, as you read through the Bible, sometimes there's only one verse, but that verse has such deep meaning. God is love. God is light. The heavens declare the glory of God. So what I've tried to do here, my son is a physicist, a research physicist, so I've got together with him and said, Paul, show me some of the things of science, and he's a believer. He loves the Lord. And I said, show me some of the things that science has discovered about light. Why, maybe that shows some of the characteristics of God. Man, there's a lot of neat things. Some of them we've gone through. Light's unique. There's nothing else like light. Darkness isn't light. It's the absence of light. God is unique. There's no one else like God. Satan's not his opposite. Satan was a created being. Light has a duality. It's both a particle and a wave. Jesus was a duality. He was completely God. He was completely man. And we could go on and on. I won't review all of it, but go back and look at some of the videos. Now, here's one. We just got started on this last time. What's time? Sometimes you use the word a lot and you get thinking about it. Well, exactly what is time? I looked it up, and boy, they have some big old long. Here's one of their definitions. Time is the continuous progression of existence, measuring the irreversible flow of events from the past through the present and into the future. Time is intertwined with space as a single continuum known as space-time. Mercy. Well, I couldn't find a real simple one except one that said time means to measure how long an action takes. And I think, well, that's just as good as any of them. Can any of you think of a simpler definition? Yeah, they say time's a linear progression. Now, here's something that's really fascinating. Light is related to time. Did you ever think of that? So let's look at it. And this is going to be a little bit of a review from last time. Light's unique concerning time. If you look at the equation that says time's going to change if you're moving. If something's moving, the time for the person with a clock that's moving is going to be different from a person with a clock that's not moving relative to them. Where does it show you that in the equation? What's the letter here that every time we see that, oh, that's involving light? Letter C. Remember Einstein's equation? Equals mc squared. Why would light be involved in some equation about time? I don't know. Maybe the scientists know, but I don't know. And here's something we've talked about right now. If you look at any object that's moving, let's take an aircraft. You have a clock in the aircraft. You have a clock on the ground. Now, these have to be very, very precise clocks, where they could read time to a microsecond, or even better, to a nanosecond. So if you have that, you'd find out that somehow, this is called the velocity time dilation. The faster you move, the slower time moves compared to the clock at rest. And somehow light is involved with this. We saw the equation. I'm not going to go back and try to explain the equation because I can't. But somehow light's involved. And you know what? This happens not just high-speed jet aircraft. This is true at all speeds. Do they have any evidence for this? I mean, you can show little cartoons with a clock whirling around and the other one moving slow. Yeah, they've got proof for this. This goes back to an experiment. You can look this up on the internet. Haffel-Keating experiment in 1971. I read their total budget was $8,000. Now that's a dinkadoo amount today, but that's all they gave them. So they didn't have their own plane, so they got tickets to go on a jet airliner, and they took their clock with them, and they signed him in as Mr. Clock. So Mr. Clock took up a couple seats in the airliner. So they have these very precise clocks. If you watch the clocks, they were synchronized where the time was exactly the same over a long period of time. They didn't lose a second. They just click, click, click. So they have one of their clocks in the airliner, and they left one of the clocks on the ground. And here's the clock they left on the ground. If you go to the Smithsonian, it's there. This is one of the clocks that was used in that experiment. This is old Mr. Clock. And from this clock, they were doing timing in the nanoseconds. That means they could time something to a billionth of a second. It takes this long for 1 second for me to say 1001. Now they could time something a billionth of that. Wow. So they got very precise clocks. So they take their clocks, and one of them is on the ground, and they fly to the east all the way around the earth. They have to land and do it from airport to airport, but they fly east all the way around the earth in the same way as the earth's rotation. And then they do the same thing westward. And here's the results they got. They found out that when they did this, and you compared, when they were flying east, you compared that clock that was in the aircraft with the clock that was on the ground, ran slower. Now remember, this is according to Einstein's theory of relativity, as you move faster, that clock slows down compared to a clock on the ground. So they're going the same way the Earth's rotating. Wait a minute, are they? Earth rotates from east to west. No, they're going. I get mixed up on these. But here's the results they got. And they checked the clock that was when they were flying to the west. That clock ran faster. So here's what the scientists have said about this. This was performed in 1971. It demonstrated that a running clock lost synchronization with a lab clock or stay-at-home clock. Moving clocks run slow. And this has been verified by a national laboratory. This is the National Institute of Standards and Technology at Boulder, Colorado. That's where my son works. And they have another lab in Maryland. And they do all the testing of very, very precise things. Now, they have a clock there that's even more precise. Let me read you how precise this clock is. This clock is a clock that can measure time to the femtoseconds. And you say, what in the world's a femtosecond? Let me show you. It's pretty small. A femtosecond, if we look at our chart here, remember the people that were flying in the aircraft, they were doing it to a nanosecond. A femtosecond is 1,000 times smaller than that. It's a billionth. It's a millionth of a billionth of a second. So they're getting their timing down very, very, very precise. So here's something they discovered. Not only does light affect time when you're moving at high speeds, light affects time if you're in a gravity field. It's called gravitational time dilation. And in this, how does the gravity affect the time? Well, here's what they found out. The stronger the pull of gravity, the slower the time passes. Now here's their equation. What do you recognize in that equation again that we saw in the last equation? Speed of light's there again. Why should it be? Well, it's there. There's a lot of things we don't know about God, isn't there? And I think God picked light. God is light because it shows a lot of really fascinating things. Maybe you're like the student that would be in this class, as many students actually look forward to Mr. Atwater's math test because they liked one of the choices. Who cares? The square root of 9 is 3. And some people would say, Wayne, who cares if they measured time in a million and a billionth of a second and it was a little bit faster when they were going in the jet than when they were on the ground? You know, all of you care. I'll show you why. It affects all of your lives. Now here's one that is just kind of interesting. If you take a person the gravitational time dilation in your body, your head is under less gravity than your foot. So your head is going to age faster than your feet. Now, over your lifetime, it's only going to be 90 billionths of a second difference. But here's something interesting. Look what they have in the middle of that body. What's this? 37 centimeters proves it. What's that? Oh, 33, sorry. Well, here's what that's about. The NIST laboratory did an experiment to see if they could detect anything there. So the NIST laboratory used one of their really precise atomic clocks. This clock loses 1 second in 300 million years. In other words, you could take two of these clocks, synchronize them, they wouldn't lose any time, they wouldn't disagree, except maybe once in 300 million years. So this is a very, very precise clock. They're measuring time here in femtoseconds, and we've already seen that's a very, very, very short period of time. So here's what they did in their experiment. Does gravity really affect time, and is light involved somehow in gravity affecting time? So NIST researchers, they synchronized two quantum clocks. That's these very precise clocks. And they raised one of them 33 centimeters. So they have a clock here and a clock about a foot higher. You think, well, so what? Well, here's what they found out. And when they did this, their lower clock was synchronized with this higher clock, but they found they were out of synchronization if they left them there for a little bit, and the higher clock was running faster. Now let's look at something a little closer. What's that?
Red Mountain.
Red Mountain. What if you put a clock on top of Red Mountain and one down at the base? Where's gravity the weakest? At the top of Red Mountain or at the base?
Top.
Should be at the top, because we're measuring the force of gravity from the center of the Earth. Or we're assuming that would be a point where all the masses we can make our measurements from. So if you put a clock at the top where gravity is less, do you remember how that clock's going to run? It's going to run faster up the top of Red Mountain. And you say, what nuts done that? Well, someone did to prove it. Now, they didn't use Red Mountain. They used a higher mountain. So this was a scientist that picked the Tucson Observatory at Mount Lemmon. Now, have you been up there, Keith? I've never been there, but this is the observatory they picked. This was in 2016. The scientist, this time he had 6 of these very precise clocks. And he said, well, I'm going to put 3 of them way up by the observatory, and then I'll put 3 of them down in Tucson. And he made sure they were all synchronized, made sure for several days, they were synchronized. They were running right, and they're very precise, so they weren't off very much. So 6 atomic clocks were synchronized. He goes and he puts, this is at an elevation of 9,020 feet, 9,120 feet. He puts 3 of these clocks in the astronomers' they have some rooms up there for visiting astronomers. So he put 3 of them in that building. And then he takes 3 of them and puts them down in his hotel in Tucson. Now, there's quite a difference there. It's not just 33 centimeters. There's quite a difference. So he thought, if this equation really works, these clocks ought to be off quite a bit. And the clocks he went back a day later, and the clocks that were on the top of the mountain, they were running 21 nanoseconds faster. Nanoseconds is a billionth of a second, so you have to have a good timer. But as we look at this, let's be honest. Who cares if we can measure a millionth of a billionth of a second, or if the clocks are running faster or slower? All of you should care, and I want you to tell me 3 initials that show how important this is. I'll give you a clue. This uses it. My smartphone, my smartwatch, both of those use that. You know what it is? What's GPS stand for? Global Positioning System. We have satellites up there, and they're taking fixes on these satellites to get longitude, latitude, and altitude, and they want it very precise. So these global positioning devices, they're used in aircraft. If you've got a newer car, it's in your new car. They're used on these smartwatches. They're used on your smartphones. And I used to go hiking all the time and use one for hiking. I loved it because I get turned around on hiking. If you took me out in the woods and spun me around 3 times and hid behind a tree, I couldn't tell which way to go home. Now, in the early days, I'd take my compass with me. And I had a map, so I'd say, well, I'll just go north till I hit some road because I know there's a road north of me. But now with a GPS, I would mark my position using the global positioning satellite. I'd mark the position of my car, and I'd go hiking any direction I wanted. And if I wanted to wander off, oh, that's interesting, I'll go over there. Oh, I can't cross that canyon, so I'll go this way. If you asked me at the end of my hike before I was ready to come back to the car, Wayne, which way to the car? And my son used to do that. We used to hike together. Dad, which way? I'd say, I think it's that way. He'd look at the GPS. No, Dad, it's that way. I'd get mixed up. But that little GPS, I'd watch it, and it would have an arrow pointing the car. If I went too far that way, I'd bring it back where the arrow was right ahead of me. And pretty soon the little GPS would say, you're within 30 feet of your car. Now, if you can't find a car within 30 feet, you're in trouble. So I'd always found the car. So here's what they did. When they launched these GPS satellites, time dilation had to be taken into account. Here's why. The satellites were moving at a very high rate of speed. Remember what we said? They found out if something's moving at a high rate of speed, that's going to affect the clock. Remember our little cartoon there where the clock that's moving at a high rate of speed, is it going to move faster or slower? It's going to move slower. So they have to take that into account. So here's what they did. Each GPS satellite contains a very accurate clock. Satellite clocks are moving in orbit, so they experience time dilation. They run slow by about 7 microseconds. I'll talk about the microseconds per day. To accurately determine a position, the effective time dilation they have to account for this. Or those GPSs would be useless. My hiking GPS, your watch, your phone, the one on your car, the one in aircraft, they'd be useless if they didn't. But there's another thing. Not only is time affected by something moving rapidly, time's also affected, remember, by the position from the center of the Earth as far as gravity is concerned. These satellites are over 12,000 miles above the Earth. They're not 33 centimeters. They're not 9,000 feet like the mountain. They're 12,000 miles above the Earth. So both of these have to be taken into account. And here's remember with the gravitation, is that upper clock going to run faster or slower? That's running faster. So they got to take that into account compared to the lower clock. So in space, where gravity's less, because you're further out from this big massive Earth, those clocks are going to run faster than those on the Earth. So here's each clock in the GPS satellite is going to tick 45 microseconds faster than the clocks on the Earth. So they've got to combine these two together. So here's the first one. You have a clock that's very high above the Earth, so they found out, okay, that's 45 microseconds faster. You have a satellite that's moving at a very high velocity. They found out that's, 7 microseconds slower. So what's the total effect? Well, you subtract the slower one from the faster, you get 38 microseconds faster. A microsecond is a millionth of a second. So you say 38 microseconds, no big deal. But it is a big deal because the satellites, they're not accurate to a microsecond, they're accurate to a nanosecond, which is a billionth of a second. They have to be accurate too. 1 nanosecond. So if you have 38 microseconds air on the satellite, how many microseconds? If you know that 1 microsecond is 1,000 nanoseconds. So I have 38 microseconds. How many nanoseconds? 38,000 nanoseconds. So the satellite clock is going to be off, if you don't make this correction, by 38,000 nanoseconds, and it can only be off 1 nanosecond if it's going to be accurate. So here's an interesting question. We're getting our signals from the satellites by electromagnetic waves, which is light. How far does light travel in 1 nanosecond? Let's look at a calculation here. If I ask you, how far would your car go in 1 hour if you're traveling 60 miles an hour? 60 miles. So we've got an equation. The equation says, you want to know the distance light would go in 1 nanosecond? Multiply the velocity that light's traveling times the amount of time. So light's traveling, let's not use the 186,000 because I can't do that in my head. Let's do metric units. Light's traveling 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. How long is a nanosecond? Well, that's 1 times 10 to the minus 9 seconds. When you multiply powers, you add them. So 10 to the 8th times 10 to the minus 9 is going to give you 10 to the minus 1. 3 times 10 to the minus 1 meters. A meter's this far. So it's 1/3 of a meter. If anyone ever asks you, how far does light travel in a nanosecond? About a foot. Okay? So, is that a big deal then? Well, let's look at it. Remember, if timing's off 1 nanosecond, that's about a foot. If it was off 1 nanosecond, you'd be a foot off. Like if I'm using my little GPS for hiking, oh no, it's off a foot. Big deal, I can find something within a foot. But the satellite clock is not off 1 nanosecond, it's off 38,000 nanoseconds if they don't correct it. So let's look, if you're a pilot, you're using GPS. David was a pilot. If he was using GPS, say he's up in Alaska, it's all clouded in, he's got a GPS unit that's vectoring him to his nearest airport, but the satellites aren't making correction, they're off by 38,000 feet. So if David's trying to come into some airport, he's going to be off 7 miles. Now that's not good. If you're flying with some airline, they're on instrument landing, and they're off by 7 miles. They're going to miss that runway by 7 miles. That's not a good thing, is it? All right, the result of all of this may remind you that maybe you're like this student in Mr. Osborne's class. Mr. Osborne, maybe excuse my brain's full. You know, we had so much math and technical things going back and forth and everything. What does all this have to do with time as far as God's concerned, as far as the Bible's concerned? Let's look at that. Our God created light and time. We don't know how they're really interrelated to each other, but He's the one that created these. So look up Genesis 1:1-5, and you follow along. I'm going to read the New Living Translation. You follow along in your translation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light was good. And he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day and the darkness night. And the evening passed and the morning came, marking the first day. So our God's created. He's the creator of light and time. Our God exists outside of time. Look at Psalm 90, verse 4. Psalm 90, verse 4. Psalm 90, verse 4, 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. Our God's, he's outside of time. We're in time, but he's outside of time. Now here's something that happened in the New Testament that really puzzled the people. And if I'd been there, boy, it would have puzzled me. Jesus said he knew and he spoke with Abraham. Abraham lived thousands of years before Jesus. Look at John 8, 56 to 58. Jesus is talking to the Jews, and he says, "Your father Abraham rejoiced as he looked forward to my coming. He saw it and was glad." The people said, "You aren't even 50 years old. How can you say you've seen Abraham?" Jesus answered, "I tell you the truth. Before Abraham was even born, I am." That's God's name. They knew that. What did they do after he told them that? They wanted to stone him. They knew that, hey, you're a blasphemer. You're a man. You're claiming you've seen Abraham. You're claiming you're God. We're going to stone you for that. Now, there's two frames of reference for time. We're in the time frame of reference for us. God's outside the time frame. And let me show you the verses that tell us that. So let's look when Moses asked God, "What's your name?" And that's in Exodus 3, 13 to 15. So if you take it in context, this is Moses, and Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What's his name?' Then what shall I tell them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you're to say to the Israelites. I am have sent you." That's the Hebrew letters, YHWH. Yahweh, some say Yahweh, some say Jehovah. There's no clue in the scriptures how to pronounce this. The Hebrew doesn't have any vowels. So here's what one of the scholars said about this. If you look at this, they've put it in Hebrew. The concept of says this is what the name shows. The I am. The concept of an eternal now is implied in the explicit four-letter name of God, YHWH. In the Hebrew, the spelling includes the letters of the verb to be in its three tenses: I was, I am, I will be. The past, the present, and the future are all contained within the eternal. Wow. Here's another one I found that was very interesting. This name, I am, YHWH, means the self-existing or the ever-existing one. Here's what this one says. It says that Moses is asking God about his character and his nature. Names were very important to the Hebrew people. Names had a meaning. My name means wagon builder. Now, I don't go around telling people, "Here's wagon builder here. Are you needing wagons fixed?" And you can look up your name. But usually when we name our children, when my parents named us, I'm not sure that we want our boy to be a wagon builder. But in the old days, when the Hebrews named someone, like when Benjamin was named, son of my right hand, the names had a meaning. So I'm sure Moses says, what's your name? Because if you give me your name, I know the meaning. And his name means the self-existent one. He doesn't need anyone. If you look at this, God stands alone. He doesn't need anything, and he's wholly self-sufficient. Here's what one of the commentators said: God doesn't need us, but that makes it all the more wondrous. He wants us. This is a God who was so love motivated to know us and to be in a relationship with us that he came to earth as a human, and he took punishment we deserved. Yahweh is here interacting with our world among us, and he does that out of love. God's under no obligation to remain close to us or to work in our lives, but he's writing a love story about himself, and yet he chooses to do so. In fact, he chooses to build his very kingdom among believers. Isn't that wonderful? We have a God that does that. And here's another one that his name indicates. His name indicates that he's eternal and he's unchanging. He's always existed. God's not in time. He's always existed, and he always will. He's the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. He's the unchanging God. He doesn't change his nature based on what's popular at the time. He's always been who he is from the very beginning of creation. God isn't changed by new and popular philosophies or theologies. Look at Jeremiah 32:16. Ah, sovereign Lord, you've made the heavens and the earth by your great power and your outstretched arm. Nothing is too hard for you. Now, as we study light, we have a great God. We can see some of the just little hints of why God says God is light, some of the things about light that we haven't known anything about until just recently. Here's a big one: the power of God. Does light have power? We're going to talk about that.